idea for the project, in Kyoto, 5 intermediate school students stopped me and asked to practice speaking English. They came from Fukuoka on a school trip. At the end, they gave me a handwritten, hand-decorated card that described who they were. The card included these sentences in English. "We love peace, but we hate war. We want to have a way to go toward world peace. Let's work together for world peace." That evening, when I reread their card, I thought, couldn't our karesansui gardens serve as a blank canvas on which to represent their desire, the desire of these young people for peace? I immediately went to Toshiko Tanaka here in Gainesville a year and a half ago to say, this is what I'd like to do, but how do I do it? And she's the expert on diplomacy and translation and strategizing about how to approach this particular project if you want success. We were very fortunate in this project to be put in touch with the Chugoku Shimbun newspaper in Hiroshima, and specifically a staff reporter named Yumi Kanazaki. She's devoted many years of her life to promoting efforts for world peace and anti-nuclear efforts, and she works with the newspaper's department specifically called Hiroshima Peace Media Center. And they suggested Toshiko Tanaka. She is herself a survivor of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. She's an artist, so she already understands how to think abstractly. And she's also an advocate for world peace. And her idea was to use the word Japanese peace, to use the word peace written in hiragana. The name of this project then we decided should be called Patterns for Peace, because the patterns that Tanaka-san has developed, we're hoping will promote the idea of peace as people see them in gardens this year in the United States, but maybe next year around the world.
宇宙の始まりと終わりが一つのその輪になって切れ目なく続くことを意味すると言われています。地球上の平和もこのような輪となって広がることを願ってピースリングと名付けたデザインをいくつか考えてみました。日本語のひらがなという書式がありますが、ひらがなでどんな方向から見ても平和と読めるように作図しております。平和の和は同じ発音と意味を持つ和ですね、リングの形で表現しました。
Toshiko Tanaka is the artist, and she drew several renderings of the symbols for peace in Japanese. There was Hei, the first symbol, which she represented as a mountain, and the second symbol was I, which was 2 commas, and the third symbol was Wa, which represented a circle. So her circle of peace is what we were aiming to do in each of our gardens, and she gave us some ideas on how we might be able to incorporate that. Each garden is a different size and shape, and so it was challenging to make a unifying design for all of us, but we each interpreted it in our own way.
Martin McKellar down at the Harn Museum contacted me about a year ago to discuss this idea for Patterns for Peace. He brought on 3 other gardens, and together, in unity, we rake these designs.
I survived atomic bombing in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, 75 years ago, when I was 6 years old and on my way to school at 8:15 a.m. Somebody shouted, "B-29, the enemy bomber!" I looked up and saw a tremendous flash. I was burnt and exposed to radiation. The pain was incredible. I cried my way home, but our house was ruined. My mother could not recognize me. My hair was burned. I was covered in ash. My clothes were destroyed. Many doctors were dead. There are no hospitals left. Whether we lived or died was entirely up to one's physical vigor and luck. I remember going into the house and seeing through our largely damaged roof. A small patch of blue sky, also in pain. I thought it was so beautiful. That blue sky stayed with me. It has given me the will to live even until today. It took only 1 second for a single bomb to destroy the city of Hiroshima and 140,000 lives. All my classmates were killed. My young aunt left home that morning and never came back. Every image of that terrible day remains. My generation will be the last to tell you about this event as direct witnesses. I started to suffer from symptoms of radiation when I was 12. Nobody on this planet should suffer the same tragedy. So I have one request for people. Please make close friends throughout the world. If we have close friends from around the world, we will think twice before starting wars that seek personal prosperity and supremacy. Nuclear weapons will lead the earth to destruction. They are inhumane and should never have been allowed on earth. There are many people working tirelessly for a nuclear-free world, like Yumiko Kanazaki. For instance, ICAN is a global campaign to promote abolishment of nuclear weapons. For decades, I wished with all my heart that the United Nations would make a treaty banning nuclear weapons. On July 7th, 2017, the world took the essential step it needed towards peace. My goal now is to unite people around the world behind this treaty. Together, we can pressure Japan and the UN Security Council to take future steps toward peace with us. I know one day we will live in a nuclear-free world and the beautiful blue sky will continue to shine above the heads of our future generation. Thank you for your kind attention.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was in the Marines. I spent 2 years in Vietnam and I was wounded twice. Experiencing war has to make anybody who's experienced war has to be against it, really. The things that I saw and did when I was in Vietnam are things that I wouldn't want anyone to have to see or do. And I came back to Gainesville, and in 1987, we formed the Gainesville Chapter of Veterans for Peace.
I was in the Air Force for 4 years, and I was an Air Force intelligence officer, and I served in Vietnam. And so I was stationed in Saigon for a year. We had rocket attacks almost nightly, but you would go downtown in Saigon and there would be thousands and thousands of people living literally on the curbside in boxes. And we would visit an orphanage where most of the children had lost at least one limb. And we would sometimes go to the medevac where you would see the horrific casualties that you would see for our own service members as they were getting ready to be flown back to the States. So International Day of Peace is important to me because I think if we really want to have peace, which is our mission as Veterans for Peace, we have to think about what that means. And so the question that I like to ask is, what would the world be like if we had 100 years of peace? So when I started learning about International Day of Peace, I learned about the history of it, which started with a Hiroshima survivor. And so that connection was instantly important to me. And the fact that it's not just, although our own community is important, that we connect ourselves to the whole world with this activity really appealed to me very much, and honored the history of International Day of Peace by going back to another survivor and involving them in the ceremony.
Normally when we rake the karesansui, we look to balance it with the garden and with the seasonality of the space. This is a bit of a departure from that. It's a design created by Toshiko Tanaka.
So this is kind of what you're doing.
Out of all the designs provided by Tanaka-san, we're going to go and use, I think this one and this one are going to be most suitable for this garden. She's a celebrated artist that's been recognized for her peace efforts over her long-time career. She was a survivor of the A-bomb and has devoted her life to building peace.
We were provided a sheet of different designs, I don't know, 5 or 6 maybe. And for me, my process was how it might fit best in the garden logistically, how it might look good and everything. And I played around with it for a little while and finally came to the design that I wanted because it sort of fit the space really nicely. And our garden, you can actually view it from the entirety around. So it worked really well in the space. And you know, so much of the garden is sort of, you know, there's essentially 2 elements. There's the stones, the boulders, and then there's the gravel. And how do those interact? And whenever I, you know, rake the garden, and again, Dave made a good point about this in the video about the seasonality of things, and you know, what are our intentions during that time. For me, and thinking about the design and the whole project, you know, I wanted to sort of engage the public and draw them into the process. So in my mind, I thought maybe the boulders sort of were reflective of people in the peace process. You know, some are more incorporated into design, some are, you know, less, some are bigger, some are smaller, some have more influence. So that was sort of my intentions with the design.
I think the idea for the karesansui originally just came from the fact that it's such a striking aesthetic feature and something that a lot of people recognize as distinctly Japanese. We're very fortunate to have beautiful, well-kept grounds on our campus, and so we needed something that would stand out as quite distinct. And so that was very much part of it. And then also just in terms of the work that could be done in that particular area and the way that it could be maintained and created with students, I think was very attractive. So in terms of the ways in which we use the garden, on the one hand, And perhaps its most important function is just a space for students to actually relax, a place where they can really be outside. And especially in this time of pandemic, it's really a source of refuge in our community. Right now, only about a third of our student population has returned. And they only returned just a week ago today, actually, right after the pattern was cut originally. So this was kind of there waiting for them when they returned to campus and finally found some freedom from their home situations and hopefully at least a little bit of a return to normalcy. Usually what we do is really incorporate it into coursework in the contemplative studies program. And so this is really a new discipline, although contemplation has been used, of course, both in the original academy, going back to the Greeks, and as a major part of religion and philosophical thought for millennia. But in terms of an academic discipline, it's quite new. And the way that we focus that at our program is that it's really skill-based. We try to teach students how to focus their minds, how to restrict their attention, how to release anxiety and stress, and also to gain a greater sense of situational awareness. And so in that, our garden and the karesansui in particular really serves as a training ground to develop these types of skills, not only in terms of focus and relaxation, but in terms of making a larger contribution to the community. And in particular, a real sense of personal integrity. When we go out there for our classes, and admittedly, I still need to usually assign this for credit, but when they go out there, the teaching really is that it's just about what they put into it. Whether they work on a span that's 6 inches wide. I've had students get down in that gravel. I tell them or ask them to pick out anything that's not gravel. And I've had students spend 2 hours within the radius of their own body, just picking out each individual piece. And then sometimes students like to do bigger stuff, go for the sticks and so on. And so it's really about making that contribution to the very best of your ability and relaxing into the space and finding the sense of community as we do it. So that's the way in which this particular garden's been incorporated into our campus.
We look at the pattern and we look to offer the garden as a place of healing and a place to bring joy and all of these different things. So Hoichi, Kritsu is well known for his dynamic use of space. And so in the consideration of using the dynamic use of space in the garden itself, from how you prune the trees to how you open the paths to how you clean a certain area, you try to evoke these certain feelings that can be presented through light and shadows and the sounds of the garden. So we take that same mentality into the karesansui with us, where we look at how big of a space it is, and it is quite dynamic. The boulders in there are quite large, and it is a squared area. So we don't do too many organic shapes other than in the spring a little bit. So we like to balance the karesansui with the garden as a whole. So when the outside garden is really full and lush and everyone's enjoying summer, then the inside of the karesansui will have all the lines and circles. So it's not a jarring experience when they transfer from the outside garden into the karesansui. What's beautiful about this project is that it is a little bit of a jarring experience, and it couldn't have come at a more perfect time of year, because as they walk through the garden, it's the colors are starting to change. You're seeing a little bit more balance within the garden as a whole. So you're already in kind of this contemplative mood where your eyes have more room to seek in the garden, and then as you move into that space, it's just boom, and then it's rather stark. And so when we looked at how we were going to incorporate Tanaka-san's designs into the garden, it was a thought of not just where they would go in the garden, but I wanted to do it with Rake It with Ethan, so that we could put two designs in the garden at once. And the consideration for that was, we can take these two designs, we can put them into the garden, but how can we do it fluidly together in a contemplative way that we can move with unity and harmony together through the raking? And the hope was, for us, it was a practice in contemplation of harmony and unity and peace. And we hope, that it maybe came across that way, that it's also been certainly between our two countries, how we're trying to move in unity and in grace with one another. So for us, it wasn't just the designs as the end goal, but also our process in raking the designs together and what that can mean in that idea of peace. So that's how we hope to present the project to people. And this project reminded me of when Hoichi Kuritsu once told me to try to build a garden, try to keep a garden, try to have a garden that can bring as much power out of one flower that it can create world peace. And I was really struck by that sentiment, and it took me a long time to understand what that meant. And I think I'm still trying to understand what it means. But this project was very similar to that, in that how can we put all of ourselves and all of the love that we can put into a project and have it radiate out. And I think that comes from within the people that move into this space, and it's certainly been very apparent to me in watching all the hard work that everyone has done together around this project. So I'm extremely grateful for that.
The architect had designed that pavilion so that it was in his mind, using the traditional Japanese bell, and the beams across the top that you saw are carbon fiber, wound beams of carbon fiber, which no one had ever done before. So he wanted it to be a combination of the science and technology of Oak Ridge and the traditions of Japan. Once we got the construction done and we concentrated on the landscaping that we wanted around the site, the karesansui garden was the first thing that we found a place for and wanted to have. We knew nothing about how you maintain or create such a garden, but I came across two articles that Martin McKellar had published a few years earlier in your journal. And he laid out so clearly the raking techniques and how to build the rakes that I thought we could do it. And I gave him a cold call, and I asked him if he would consider being our mentor and consultant, and he graciously said yes. He came to Oak Ridge and gave a 2-day workshop in raking, which were attended by 40 people. And about 15 of those people are our everyday rakers. They remain with us. That t-shirt that you saw, the black t-shirt that says Fourth Rock, it is our logo. When we were raking one day, somebody talked about the 3 rocks and the bell being the 4th rock from the perspective they were standing. And Martin said, "You rakers are the 4th rock." So we are thrilled with that logo. We're thrilled with our jobs in there. One other thing we haven't done yet that I think will be good if we can pull it off is in the area a little further behind the contemplation garden and the bell is we've created a space where we can have a practice and play karesansui garden to engage the public. We have the gravel there now. We need to put a raking shed where we can keep some rakes. But we think it would be great if people could come there and freely play and practice in that garden and get very involved in the idea of gravel raking. And so that's our story. We're still learning. We're not very good at it, but it's a meditation when you rake, and it's a creation, an act of creation, and I really love that. These are not the only ones that are going to be here. I have in my hand some delightful rocks. Traditionally in Oak Ridge, the Girl Scouts present a peace program at the Friendship Bell every year, but this year we're not doing that because of the social distancing requirements. But the Girl Scouts turned themselves into artists.
And they've taken Tanaka-san's elements, symbols of peace, and created stones. I love this one. This one has Mount Fuji on it, and actually the Japanese kanji, as does this one. And this is an interesting double representation of the symbols. Every rock has on it the date and Peace Day, and these rocks will be here on September 21st, right next to the garden. So any visitors who come to the garden can pick up one of these rocks as a remembrance of Peace Day.
And we feel that we are at our best when we are open to seeing our collections and our facility and our activities through the eyes of our community. And Martin has again and again inspired us to look at our karesansui garden in that regard. Our garden is also designed by Hoichi Kuritsu, and it opened in about 2012. And Martin has for a number of years been our Asian garden specialist who has not just raked and managed and grown the garden, but also created connections with audiences. When he had this inspiring encounter, as he told us a little bit about with the school children in Kyoto during his travels, he's taken that to help us. This is one example, helping us understanding how our karesansui garden at the Harn can be part of a larger conversation about, in this case, peace, and one which we have promoted in other exhibitions, and this is a great opportunity for us to extend that conversation. So Martin, of course, has been incredible in connecting us. He's very sort of dynamic in this with members of the Gainesville community, the Gainesville Japanese community, Samaya-san, and with local Veterans for Peace who spoke in the video, Mr. Scott Camille, and I think Ms. Mary Barr is here today on the video conversation. So we feel the project really weaves us more closely into the community and expands our reflections on peace in particular.
Of course, in 1942, when the Manhattan Project located part of the design and science for the atomic bomb here. This bell commemorates the fact that our town and Japan are inextricably bound together. When it was time for our town to think about its 50th anniversary and what it was to say about who we are and who we want to be, our statement was born of war, living in peace, and growing through science. This bell was the monument we chose to represent that thought in our relationship with Japan. It's called the International Friendship Bell. The bell was funded by people in Oak Ridge and people in Japan, including the transportation, with the help of Shigeko Belluri and her family. She was a Japanese resident of Oak Ridge. It is a beautiful sounding bell, and it is an iconic part of the city of Oak Ridge and in our hearts.
As we rake the designs, we do so with open hearts and minds in hopes that we'll be able to transcend the current societal constructs so that we can meet at a little higher plane that celebrates timeless beauty of nature and the timeless relationships that we can endure and appreciate in one another. For me, personally, when I started doing horticulture, I decided that I wanted to try to promote beauty and peace and do that with my life. So for me to be able to go from the creation of passive beauty, where people can come and appreciate it in a non-threatening way, to be able to go to something more active and directed, as this project has been a true privilege.